Hey folks, Nathan here. Welcome back to Nate's favorite deck building games. We continue our look here at Marvel Legendary with the 2017 large expansion, X-Men. Last episode, we did check out the two small expansions for 2017, so if you missed that, be sure to circle back at some point. Now, we've seen new mechanics and whatnot introduced with other large sets, particularly with, say, Secret Wars Volume 1 and 2. But X-Men kind of takes the cake so far in terms of introducing the most new mechanics for one main expansion. Of course, you'll need to have the Heroic base set or the Legendary Villains base set to be able to play this. I would recommend the Heroic set. Let's take a look at what's inside and then get into all of the new mechanics. And when I say all the new mechanics, they didn't waste any time. There's no fluff on the front of this thing, and your material on new mechanics runs all the way until almost the middle of the last column on the back of the rules supplement. If you've ever compared these to other rules supplements, yeah, there's quite a bit here. So we start out pretty much as we always do with 8 new schemes. We have Alien Brood Encounters, Anti-Mutant Hatred, Televised Death Traps of Mojo World, Horror of Horrors, Mutant Hunting Super Sentinels, Nuclear Armageddon, The Dark Phoenix Saga, X-Men Danger Room Goes Berserk. Interestingly, they give us one new scheme twist to go with the ones from the original set, and we're given one more Master Strike to go with the ones from the original set. We are given 9 new bystanders, but this is a new type of bystander known as a heroic bystander. In this case, bystander, New Mutants, or just regular bystander tends to be what they are labeled. The key here is that for any of these bystanders, when they are rescued, you gain it as a hero, rather than being one that just goes into your victory pile. And you'll notice none of them even have victory points because they're going into your deck when you rescue them. We have 20 of a new type of card called Horror. Horrors enter the game when you're playing with epic masterminds. We mentioned that briefly back in our last episode. There are 6 new masterminds with this set, which gives us a chance to reiterate that whole epic mastermind thing. A mastermind typically has 1 mastermind card and 4 mastermind tactics. The tactics are the same as we've seen in previous sets, but just like what we saw with Spider-Man Homecoming, all of our masterminds in X-Men are double-sided. One side is regular, the other side is epic. And an epic mastermind is going to add horrors somehow into the game. For instance, as we turn from Onslaught to Epic Onslaught, notice that Epic Onslaught's Master Strike says KO all heroes dominated by Onslaught. Then each player reveals their hand and chooses 2 of their non-gray heroes. Onslaught dominates those heroes. Then play a random horror. And your horrors in many cases have ambush abilities and other just bad things that happen. It's basically designed to make your game extra difficult alongside that epic version of your mastermind. So again, for our masterminds, all of which have an epic version, we have Onslaught, Dark Phoenix, Arcade, Deathbird, Mojo, and finally, Shadow King. While I've got Shadow King here, just as another example, for instance, the start of the game set up for Epic Shadow King is play 2 random horrors. I would note, by the way, that the game's instructions notes that Dark Phoenix and Onslaught are already incredibly tough. They're almost like hard mode unto themselves, so using the epic version of each is extra difficult, sort of a super hard mode. We have 7 new villain groups that, as always, have 8 cards each. We have the Hellfire Club, and I would note here that another idea that comes back from a previous set is the idea of a villain ascending to become another mastermind, where you wind up having to fight more than one mastermind at a time. That is, for instance, an ambush ability here for this version of Mastermind Jason Wingard from Hellfire Club. So we have Hellfire Club as a group. We have Shadow X. We have Shi'ar Imperial Guard. We have Murder World. We have Sisterhood of Mutants, as opposed to Brotherhood. We have Mojoverse. And we have Dark Descendants. I would note among the villains that we have another new mechanic in play, which is Trap. Every villain group in X-Men has at least one card labeled as Trap. What happens with the Trap is that rather than coming out as a villain and just making its way across the city, when a Trap comes out of the villain deck, it gives you something that generally happens, but by the end of your turn, you must do something that it says, or suffer some type of consequence that it lists. So for instance, the Shi'ar Trial by Combat. The ambush ability is, if the bridge is empty, reveal the top card of the villain deck. If it's a villain, put it on the bridge. So that makes it difficult because you got a villain about to escape. By end of turn, have no villains on the bridge. So take them out, quick! Or suffer. After you draw your new hand at the end of your turn, each player KOs a non-gray hero from their discard pile. Okay? If by chance you do manage to pull that off, and you avoid suffering that fate, you get to put this in your victory pile for the victory points that are listed. We have 5 new henchman groups. Again, 10 cards that are all exactly the same. We have the Brood, Hellfire Cult, as opposed to Hellfire Club, Shi'ar Death Commandos, Shi'ar Patrol Craft, and the Sapien League. We then have a total of 15 new heroes, all of which of course have 14 cards each, as normal, which are all of the X-Men affiliation, or team icon. Now 3 of them are going to be those divided type of heroes for some of their cards, like we saw back in the Civil War expansion. Only this time, we're going to find that the affiliations or team icons on each half are always still X-Men. So we have one of those in Colossus and Wolverine, which does include some split cards, Colossus, Wolverine, but again, both X-Men. We have Legion. X-Men. Legion is sometimes divided with himself, both still X-Men. The other one with some splits, Aurora and Northstar. They're divided cards, Aurora on one side, Northstar on the other, both still X-Men affiliation. If you don't recall how those work, again, while they're in their hand, it's like everything technically exists for the moment in terms of revealing things and whatnot. When it comes to actually playing them, you have to choose one side or the other, and when it comes to acquiring them, you pay just the one cost, not both. It's just noting that the cost is the same either way. Continuing on with our X-Men, we have Phoenix, Cannonball, Dazzler, Havoc, Jubilee, Kitty Pryde, Longshot, Banshee, Beast, this time actually as an X-Man. We have X-23, and then as I reach across here, because boy, there's a lot of these, we have Polaris and Psylocke. We also have 9 new cards that are known as token cards. This is a new thing for this set. They all have this little token symbol up here on the side. And essentially what happens is that another card may cause you to add, say, a Phoenix Force card somewhere, and in doing so, instead of pulling it from some other place, you're grabbing one of these tokens to represent it instead. So, for example, for the Mastermind Deathbird, her Master Strike says, if there are already any Shi'ar villains in the city, each player gains a wound. Then this strike enters the city as a Shi'ar Battlecruiser token, villain with 7 attack, worth 5 victory points. So you would take that Master Strike and put it into the city as a Shi'ar Battlecruiser, but instead of actually just having it sit there as the Master Strike card itself, it would be represented by this Shi'ar Battlecruiser card with that 7 and that 5 as mentioned, and it's got the little token symbol to let you know that this doesn't go into the regular decks anywhere. This is just used when that token has to come out and be used. We have a few of these. We've got Phoenix Force, Master Plan, which is a Mastermind token. We've got the animatronic Killer Clown a couple of times, and the rest are Shi'ar Battlecruisers. But there's a total of 9 of these token cards, just to help take the place of other cards as needed. And I should note that when I say as needed, It's just as needed if you want to use them. I mean, theoretically, you could still use that Master Strike to represent that Shi'ar battlecruiser instead of pulling a token to represent it. It's just cooler, easier, nicer looking, and easier to remember if you use the token instead. But these 9 little token cards, these are all optional. So we've already talked about traps, which are new. We've talked about tokens and horrors, both of which are new. We've talked about those heroic bystanders that are new. We've talked about the double-sided epic masterminds that were actually introduced here, but that we saw first last episode with Spider-Man Homecoming. We've also talked about how the divided cards and the idea of villains ascending into masterminds also come back from previous sets. Would you believe we still have several more new mechanics to talk about? Let's hit them. We also have a new keyword here, X-Gene. It'll say X-Gene and then some type of hero. In this case, this is for the covert hero. And then something behind it that you could possibly get. What happens with X-Gene is you look in your discard pile. Do you have any heroes in there of that type? If so, you get whatever is behind it. So in this case, you get +1. What that is there is piercing energy, which is our next keyword to look at. But the key thing here is that it's always looking in your discard pile, which means that if you realize your discard pile doesn't have what you need, you might just recruit someone from the headquarters on that turn so they immediately go in your discard pile, if they're of that type, and then use it and still get that ability on this turn. Pretty cool. Now what that piercing energy means, which is another keyword, is that for piercing energy, instead of using just a regular attack, using regular attack points, you could fight an enemy by instead using a piercing energy point, that little orange circle looking thing. And you might say, well, that looks very familiar. It should, because it looks a heck of a lot like the symbol for victory points. And that's how you defeat them. So this guy says +1, if I did the X-Gene, +1 piercing energy. So I would use that +1 to attack someone based on their victory point value, not their attack value. Now in this case, I wouldn't get him because his value there is 3. But if, say, the victory point value was 1, he'd be defeated regardless of what his attack value is. The downside is that sometimes you do run into villains that don't have a printed victory point value, in which case you can't use piercing energy against them. But on the plus side, you can ignore any special conditions about fighting an enemy, and you automatically rescue any human shields, which is another of our new keywords. You're gonna run into some cards that have that human shield keyword. So for instance, Major Domo here from Mojoverse, Ambush. Major Domo captures a human shield. Sometimes it'll say 2 or 3 or whatever. Capturing a human shield means that you take one of the bystander stack cards, just take the top one off that face down stack, and stick it still face down underneath Major Domo here. And then you can't actually fight Major Domo until all of those human shields are removed. How do you remove a human shield? You pay his attack cost. So if he's got 1 human shield, you gotta pay 4 once to get rid of the human shield, and then you could go after him. And you're just rescuing the bystander like you would otherwise. This is similar to what the Noir small expansion did with the Hidden Witnesses, but keep in mind that even though they're both putting face-down bystanders underneath that could be there with face-up bystanders, the way that you're clearing them out is different. In that case, it was just paying 2 recruit to get rid of those Hidden Witnesses. In this case, you're paying the full attack value of whoever it is that's holding the human shields. Then you have a new keyword, Berserk. You know, my love for you is like a truck berserker. Would you? Anyway, bad Clerks reference there, sorry. But Berserk basically means that you will take, when you're playing that card, you will take the top card off of your deck and discard it. But when you do, if it has a printed attack value, you get that added attack value. So like if it's printed attack value, like this one say is 2, and this happens to be the card that you were discarding for some other card's Berserk ability, you would gain 2 attack on top of whatever your card actually sets. What's cool about it is there's sometimes also things like Berserk Berserk, or Berserk Berserk Berserk, which lets you do it multiple times. And because you do the items in order, you could do the Berserk, and then maybe what it is that you end up pulling will help you activate an X-Gene ability, which sometimes does follow that Berserk keyword. Bear in mind, though, that Berserk only does anything if the card that you took off the top of your deck to discard is having some type of a attack value. If what it has is some type of recruit value or some type of like victory point or piercing energy type value, it does absolutely nothing. It must be attack value. Then you have some cards that are going to have the ability Soaring Flight. And Soaring Flight is kind of like taking Wall Crawl and Teleport and sort of mixing them together. Because when you recruit this hero, kind of like with Wall Crawl, you are then going to set it aside at the time, like when you're pulling a card from your hand in Teleport, and then at the end of your turn, when you draw a new hand, this gets put in as an extra card for that new hand. So yeah, kind of like Teleport and Wall Crawl put together, but Soaring Flight is just another variant on that theme of preparing a future hand with something brand new you just recruited. Now you might have been like me thinking, seriously, Dazzler, Jubilee, those are characters are going to bring into the game. Oh, they're so powerful. But they have another new keyword, which is Light Show, which will have some ability behind it. If you have played at least 2 cards on your turn that have a Light Show keyword, you then get to pick one of those cards' Light Show keywords to actually do. It's the idea of sort of blinding your enemies. But bear in mind, it doesn't matter how many different cards you've played with Light Show on it, as long as you've got at least 2, you only get one of those Light Show abilities activating. It's not like, oh, well, I played 4 of them, so I get 2 or 3 or even 4 Light Show abilities to activate. No. Doesn't matter how many you did, as long as it's at least 2, you still only get the one ability actually activating. But you get to choose which one. And finally, the last new mechanic for X-Men, holy crap, there's been a lot of them, is Dominate. And Masterminds can do things that dominate, villains can do things that dominate. Either one. If a hero card is dominated, that hero gets put underneath that enemy, whether it's a Mastermind, villain, whatever, and that enemy gets +1 attack for each hero that it's dominating. So if it's 2, they get +2. 3, they get +3, and so on. When you attack that Mastermind or villain, then it's like all of those dominated heroes sort of scatter, and each player gets one of those dominated heroes added into their discard pile. That way, you're sort of freeing them by doing that attack. But if there are more sitting around underneath as dominated characters than there are players, all those extra ones, they just get KO'd. They're gone. If it turns out there's only, say, 1 dominated character, and maybe you've got 3 different players, then it just goes to the 1 player who did the attack. If there's any other ones and it's an uneven number compared to the number of players, whoever it was that did the attack just decides who gets the other ones. But nobody ever gets more than 1. Moreover, if a villain escapes while they're dominating a bunch of heroes underneath them, all those heroes also go into the escape pile. So in essence, it's kind of turning heroes into acting a little bit like bystanders, but oftentimes there's some positive effect that the Mastermind gets to help them based on how many they're dominating, or in the case of a villain, the same type of thing. So you definitely don't want very many heroes dominated at a time. And there you have it. Legendary X-Men, the single most complex expansion for the Legendary Marvel deck building game thus far as of the first quarter or so of 2018. I'd highly recommend it. This is a really fun way to get some more life out of your deck building game experience with Legendary. Just know you got quite a few new keywords and such to learn before you can actually start playing in depth. Next time, we'll take a look at the only release thus far for 2018, the small expansion, Champions.